I was the only Black teacher for the 6 years that I worked there. So it was just crazy. I don't think that it wasn't a bad experience there, but it could have been better. It could have been better. There was a lot, I just didn't always feel welcomed. I know that there were times where I was purposely excluded from things that the teachers did together, but I didn't let it bother me because I'm like, look, I'm not here to make friends anyway. So I just did my job.
Welcome to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. This podcast is more than storytelling, it's archival justice. For too long, the voices of Black educators who have left traditional spaces in education have been silenced, dismissed, or left out of the record. Here, we reclaim that narrative. Every interview is a living archive capturing the wisdom, resilience, and truth of Black educators who have shaped classrooms, communities, and generations. Together, we name the challenges: racial battle fatigue, systemic inequities, the weight of caring too much, but we also honor the brilliance and joy that Black educators bring, the creativity, the innovation, the care, and the deep legacy of resilience. Each episode is both a testimony and an offering, an act of preservation for those who came before, and a guide for those still walking this path today. By listening, you are helping to ensure that these stories are not lost, but held, celebrated, and passed forward. So take a breath, settle in, and join us as we honor the past, uplift the present, and reimagine the future of education together. All right, folks, welcome back to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators with me, your host, Dr. Asia. We're in season 6, episode 2. And that'll probably be the last time you hear me keep count because I can never remember what episode, what season. But just like I said in Cammie's episode, it's not about me. It's about our guests. Welcome to the show, Monika. How are you today?
I am doing amazing, Asia. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So Monika, I should say her whole name, Monika Robinson. We saw each other on LinkedIn. She said, hey, it'd be cool to be in the show. And I'm like, let's talk. And so here she is. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Yes. Shout out to LinkedIn. That's my baby. I'm on LinkedIn every day.
Me too. I live there. People know that by now. Yes.
Yes. Me and you both. So I am a former educator. I worked in public schools for many years. I think I was in public schools for 10 years. I was a director at a nonprofit. I am now a current business owner. I have a business called Reparations Ed. I support leaders in education with wellness, coaching, training, and all that good stuff. And so, I live in Dallas, Texas, born and raised in Dallas on Triple D. Shout out. So, I'm just excited. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here and to hear your story. So we'll just go ahead and get started. Like you said, I've been here, I've been there, I've done this, I've done that. So let's start you off. How did you know education was for you? How did your education journey start?
Okay, so I was one of those folks who knew I wanted to be a teacher. I didn't just stumble into it like a lot of people. And I know some of your other podcast guests, because I listen to your podcast. A lot of your other guests have stories about that. But I'm the oldest daughter. So right there, that tells you a lot, So I'm like the one who has to be in charge all the time. And I would sit down with my brother and my sister and I would make them play school or play teacher. But I always had to be the teacher. They had to listen to me. We had a little chalkboard, It was just, I would put on this t-shirt. I know a lot of Black girls would do this when we were little. We would take a t-shirt and put the stretchy part of the t-shirt around our heads and then it would hang down. I don't know if you ever did that, Asia, but I'm an 80s baby and that's what we did because we wanted to pretend we had long hair. So I would do that. And so I kind of always knew that, I'm going to be a teacher. So that propelled me on the journey. I went to school for education. I started off as a business major, but I ended up changing my major to teaching. And I just never looked back. It's always just been something I was interested in.
Yeah. And shout out to that story. Sarah Graham was on the show couple seasons back, and she had the exact same story. She had a sister, and she would force her to play school, and she said she would do worksheets, and her sister said she had zero interest and didn't tell her until she was an adult. Like, she hated it. Girl was like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah, I hated doing worksheets. I didn't want to play with you." So you are not the only one out here torturing siblings with knowledge. So
I'm gonna have to ask them if they hated it or not. I'll stay tuned. I'll follow up with you.
yeah, let us know. So you went to school for business. So after you graduated, what did you do? So you didn't find a job right away. So what did you do until you
I
found a
didn't
job?
find a job right away. And so what I did was I did 2 years at a staffing agency.
Okay.
And I was really good at that.
As a
Like I
sub or something else?
No, as at a staffing agency, I was staffing just random jobs. I know we were finding like I was finding mortgage loan officers. I know back then, like the non-existent Countrywide. I know people remember Countrywide from the early 2000s. We were staffing for them. Like I would find mortgage loan officers to go and work at Countrywide, right? Yeah, I did that for 2 years, had nothing to do with teaching or education, like, whatsoever. And so I did that, and then I got a teaching job a few years later. So I ended up going to work at this suburban elementary school in kind of like an upscale neighborhood right outside of Dallas. It's an upscale suburb in an upscale neighborhood. So needless to say, I was the only Black teacher. And actually, I'll take that back. There was one other Black teacher. She never talked to me, never acknowledged me, and we had no communication. I may have said hi to her one time in the 2 years I was there. So it felt like I was the only Black teacher at that school. So it was difficult. And to top it off, I had a somewhat problematic Black student who just happened to be in my class. So it's like the new Black teacher, and she's got this Black student who they consider to be a behavior problem. And he's in my class. And no, so just imagine like all those dynamics were happening, So that student did a few things to some of the other kids. Their parents were upset, wanted their kids out of my class because of him. That's how my first year of teaching went. It was not fun. Like I was teaching kindergarten, and that was not the grade I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach older kids.
What
Yeah, I
grade?
wanted to like third and up, third,
Okay,
fourth.
yeah. And I'll say this so many times. We all kind of know, even if we've never taught before, what grade, what age that we feel like would make the most sense for us, especially when we start teaching. And I also wanted to teach third. I ended up teaching fourth, but third was, I don't know if I can go lower. So to say that you're in kindergarten, kind of get this, I'm just trying to get the foot in the door, I'm assuming, and then end up with like more challenges on top of the fact that you were going for older kids in the first place had to have been really difficult.
It really was. It was my first 2 years, like, I was like, "What did I, set myself up for?" But I will say that I got really good at teaching. I was a really good teacher. I ended up being I left that school and went to another school, and I ended up being the team leader. And I was a team leader for the rest of my time working in education. And you just gotta to just get in there and do it, and you're gonna fail a lot of times at first. Everybody has those first year of teaching stories, but it did get better. So yeah.
Yeah. So you went to a different school after that, but I actually have a question that just came to me. You were working in on this staffing agency after school. Did you have, or after you finished undergrad, did you have family or folks saying like, "I thought you were going to be a teacher. What happened to be a teacher?" Or it was always in the front of your mind? Were you constantly applying regardless? Like, how did that situation go? Because we probably started teaching I started teaching in 2006. So it was like right as everything started to kind of close up, was like '09, '08. But when you were sitting looking for work, how was your response from community and family?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't actually remember anybody saying, "Hey, I thought you were going to be a teacher. What happened?" I think people were just happy. Like, I'm a first generation college student. So I think people were just happy, like, she finished college, like, That was just like the big celebration was she finished college. So that was big. I don't think anybody was questioning, the career path, but I did question it a little bit because I was making just as much money and I had potential to make more because there were commissions. Like each time we placed a person, we would get commission for that person. So it's like you were getting your $40,000 or whatever the base was, $35,000 back then, and then you would get these commissions. So that's kind of how it went. And I started teaching in 2009.
I was going to say it must have been 09-ish because 09 I became tenured and it felt like the door shut to all new teachers for a long time after 09.
Because that's when the crash happened, the economic crash happened. You're right. And then it was even harder to get a teaching job.
And there were people who from my school who got laid off from work. Like there was only so many openings and, first in, like last in, first out. And so I had just made tenure. I was third year and I had just made tenure. And then everyone else, like after me, had to go find, they had openings in the district, but only so many. So that's really interesting that that was happening to you at the same time that I was just thinking like, oh, thank God I made it. I was tenured at that point.
You're jogging my memory when you say that because the second year that I was like first in, first out, last in, first out. So I didn't get my contract renewed. But what was so cool about it is that school, even for all its faults, for all its like hoity toity parents, like, these like white women that were like stay at home moms, one of them was so helpful to me. She was so kind. She put in a phone call to another school and was like, hey, my son's kindergarten teacher, we love her. She needs a job. And so that school actually hired me.
Oh,
The
that's
school that
awesome.
she put in the good word for me at. Yeah. Yeah. So, the school,
Yeah, tell us about that too. The next school then.
yeah, so I did. I went to the next school. That mom helped me. I can't even remember her name right now, but she was so sweet. And she knew I kind of had a rough time with some of those parents, and she didn't like some of them either. So she was kind of like more on my side. So anyway, I go to the next school, elementary school that was a little bit closer to my house. It was perfect. And that, and what was so crazy about that is I went to work on a kindergarten team. There was 3 teachers, and the principal hired me to be the team lead. Okay, so I'm just coming from a rough 2 years where, I feel like everybody was on my neck. Like I needed support. I had the bad kid in my class, and I hate to say bad kid, but I had the challenging kid because there are no bad kids. And so I was coming off of that into a team leader. And on top of that, the principal did not tell the other 2 people that I was going to be the team lead.
Now we all know in the audience what this is going to come out to be. Anyone who's listened to more than 2 episodes of the exit interview already knows how this is going to go. But continue, it's your story.
Yeah. So why do principals do this? I don't know. It feels like they just don't communicate or they forget or something. So later on, I mean, I had to tell them that I was the team lead in like an awkward meeting where one of the other teachers was acting as if she was the leader. And I had to be like, Uno reverse. You're not the leader.
Not the uno out, not the draw two, draw two, draw.
I had to hit her with the Uno reverse and tell her that she was not, so that caused some tension.
Yeah.
She did not like me. And
Mm.
what was so sad though is that that woman, that teacher, I think the second year I was there, she ended up getting brain cancer
Oh, no.
while as a teacher, and she ended up dying.
Oh, no.
I mean, that was crazy during the school year. Like it happened so fast. She started acting weird. She started doing really weird things. I remember she was it was time for her to go to art or specials, PE, whatever it was. I dropped my students off and I come back and walk past her classroom and she's still in her classroom with her students. And I'm like, oh, like it's time to go, And even when I told her it was time to go, she still didn't go. I think she was reading a story. She was doing something. So I had to be the one to tell the principal that she was acting weird. And the principal put her on leave. And then she just got really bad and she ended up passing away. I'm not laughing because of that. I'm laughing because of something else that happened. I don't know if I should tell this or not. Okay, so I'll tell it.
We're here now. Welcome to the exit interview.
So this is like so crazy. So when she passed away from the brain cancer, I told you she had been acting weird. She wasn't herself. And in her later days, she really was disoriented. Her memory, she just wasn't herself. But, anyways, when she knew she was going to die, she told her son that I could not come to her funeral. This woman, and I'm laughing about it now. This was a long time ago. So, this was 2010 or 11. So, it was a while ago. But I'm laughing about it because this lady was so mad that she was still mad that I became the team leader. She's still harboring that for 2 years. Actually, this was 2012. But anyway, she told her son that I could not come to her funeral. So I didn't go to her funeral. But the rest of a lot of the teachers did get substitutes. That's how much she was mad at me for being the team leader yeah. So anyway.
That's so hateful.
It is. Why would you go to your grave like
To
hating
your
on
great,
somebody you barely knew? She barely knew me.
and that was of no fault of your own.
Yeah, it
Wow.
wasn't.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
So you were there, continue to be the team lead. This is kindergarten?
I taught kindergarten there. I continue to be the team lead. And what's funny about this school too is again, I was the only Black teacher. There were no other Black teachers. There was a Black woman who worked in the front office, and that was it. There was some Hispanic teachers, who taught bilingual classes, but I was the only Black teacher for the 6 years that I worked there. So that was just crazy. I don't think that it wasn't a bad experience there, but it could have been better. It could have been better. There was a lot, I just didn't always feel welcomed. I know that there were times where I was purposely excluded from things that the teachers did together, but I didn't let it bother me because I'm like, look, I'm not here to make friends anyway. So I just did my job. It was a predominantly Hispanic school, it's like 75% Hispanic. So there were a lot of bilingual classes and they were full. So yeah, it was mostly Hispanic. I had a few Black students here and there, but that is when I think I really honed my teaching skills. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm actually really good at this. I started feeling more comfortable in front of the class. I automatically have this I show up as an authority, whereas some people don't naturally have that. So that really came into play there. Like kids would see me as the authority. Some even thought I was the principal at various times, like kids that weren't. It was an experience. And so I stayed there at that school for 6 long years.
So you were teaching at this time for 8 years total with one Black teacher in your first 2 years and then none after that. And then, of course, the front office staff at the second school. And I hear that you saying like, I'm not here to make friends. And at the same time, did you feel like it would have been at least nice to have Black folks specifically in the school? And then my second question is, was there any acknowledgement from the administration that this was something that was needed? Was there ever any conversation to say, like, we realize there's no Black teachers here. We want to connect you with some Black teachers. Did your district have anything where you all could get together? What was that like?
No, there was nothing like that. I found out way later that there was some Black teacher affinity group thing that they had in the district, but I never knew about it. Nobody ever told me about it. I don't know if it was secret. Look, I live in Texas, okay? So that can tell the listeners everything they need to know. It's very much conservative. If you're in Chicago, DC, New York, just forget everything that like it's totally opposite of everything that you probably have experienced if you're from any of those places. So no, there was no talk of we know you're the only Black teacher, let's support you, or let's even connect you with this affinity group that may or may not have existed. So yeah, but I do stay in contact with 2 teachers. They are both Hispanic, and I do stay in contact periodically with them, like, on social media, or we'll text each other here and there. They were great, and not to say the white teachers weren't. I still know some of them too and see them on social media. So there were people that not everybody was, like, mean to me or anything, but I didn't always feel connected or feel, supported at that school. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So after 6 years, you transferred?
So I taught kindergarten there and then I taught 3rd grade. So I taught 3 years kindergarten, 3 years 3rd grade, and I loved teaching 3rd grade. And then I was in a program. What's so funny is, like, they would have these little programs where if you wanted to be a leader, it was like this leadership training program or whatever, if you wanted to be a principal or assistant principal. And at that time, I did, and I had already, I believe, gotten my master's degree, or I was in the process of getting it, and so I got into this little program that the district had to, like, train up, new leaders, and I was like, "Okay, great." Finished the program and everything. We did some mock interviews, they look at your resume, they just prep you for, interviewing for these positions, and so I applied to the positions, never even got a real interview. And so I was like, well, I'm leaving then. You guys wasted resources. You not wasted them, but you used all these resources to, like, train us. But then not many of us got a job, in the district as an administrator, even an instructional coach would have been fine. Yeah. So I ended up leaving and I went to another school district where I was hired as an instructional coach. And so that was great. So this is a school that was, again, it was so similar to the school I taught at my first 2 years, the upscale neighborhood in the upscale suburbs. I was like, dang, I'm back here again, but they did have Black teachers. So they probably had like 4 or 5, I would say, which was a lot to me. I'm like, oh, wow, 4 or 5. It was more diverse. They even had, I believe they had like an Indian teacher. There was, just a variety. There were some Hispanic teachers. So it was more diverse. So I felt more at home there. But, me coming in, not knowing anybody, there's 60, probably 60 teachers at the school, and I'm the only instructional coach. There presented difficulties with, like, building relationships there and having them trust me to some teachers were open to coaching and some were like, absolutely not. Don't even come in my classroom. And so that was the challenge. There's always going to be a challenge, so that was the challenge that I experienced at that next school.
Let me ask a question about this. And I know there's probably instructional coaches that are listening or folks who are interested in being an instructional coach or who have had that experience. When you have folks who didn't want you in their space, did you just say like, okay, well then that's it? You just missed out on an opportunity? What did you do? What did you try to do? How did that go for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, instructional coaching is about building relationships. You have to have a relationship. So for those that were kind of resistant to it, I approached it cautiously and would say things like, hey, I heard you teach equations really well. And could I come in and watch? Because I want to get some tips to share with the 3rd grade. Like, I would position them as the expert and me just like, oh, I just want to learn. Could I just come watch you? So and so needed some strategies because they're, struggling on teaching equations or just need, a little bit of support with teaching whatever the subject was. So I kind of went at it like that, kind of eased it in because it has to be a partnership. And then from there they would let me come into their classroom and their guard kind of went down. They're like, well, she's not here to tell me what to do. She's here, and I would always try to help. Like, hey, I can come in during your algebra time and pull a couple students to the side who need some extra support. And so sometimes I would do that just so I'm there and then I can hear what's going on and just partner with them and not try to come in and tell them what to do. So if you're trying to be an instructional coach, don't try to tell people what to do because they are going to resist. You want to be their partner. you want to position yourself as somebody who's still learning and you want to learn from them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm always curious about those types of situations because that cannot be easy, especially like you said, you keep getting put into these positions of being new to a school and then leading, new to a school and then leading. So that has to be like really tough. Like during this experience, in your first couple years, even with you being an instructional coach, did you have a mentor or anyone that in or outside the district or whatever, official or unofficial, that was supporting you through some of this?
No. But what I
My
did
girl
have,
said, firm no.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
That is one of the big reasons why I started Reparations Ed, which I know we'll talk about that later, because education is just so full of high achieving people that have no support whatsoever, you know. So no, I did not have any support. But what I did have was, which was really good. We, as instructional coaches, all the instructional coaches at the elementary level would meet. Let's say we would meet, I think, monthly. So we would spend a whole day together, and we were led by like one person who was like a director, and she was wonderful. She was supportive. She would bring us snacks. She would listen to us vent. She was just like really loving and supportive. And so I remember those times fondly. I looked forward to that because that was bringing us together in community. And we were there like solving problems, and we had an all day session. We could eat lunch together. We bonded. And so those were really fun times. And so that was a form of support. I did not have any support at the campus level day to day, but with those women, we became friends. We would text each other and tell each other what was happening. And so, yeah, that was a form of support. It was monthly.
That's good to know. And snacks and conversation, not just venting, obviously, but strategy goes a long way for folks. And to be able to have that time away from a building, even if it's in the same district, but it's a different building, can do wonders for people and their idea generation and their ability to like thrive and just feel refreshed. So I appreciate you telling me that. What's up, beautiful people? Real quick, I want to talk to you about something. If you're a Black educator or used to be a Black educator and you've ever felt like the job asked you to give everything and left you nothing, we got something for you. My good friend Stacey Taylor Brandon and I have created Podcast and Pause, an unbooked club for Black educators. Here's how it works. You listen to a curated episode of the Exit Interview on your own time, in the car, on a walk, while you're folding laundry, just like you're doing now. Then we come back together on Zoom for a real conversation about what you heard, what it brought up, and what it means to be well as a Black educator in the classroom, outside the classroom, and beyond. This isn't a training. This isn't a to-do list. It's a soft place to land, a space to reflect, to breathe, to laugh a little, and remember, you're not alone. So if you've been needing community that gets it, come pause with us. Check the show notes for more information. Follow me on Instagram, and we'll see you there. All right, peace. So you leave instructional coaching. What's after that?
Oh, man. Well, I have a story about that. Do you want me to tell you that why I left there?
Yeah, of course. We love hearing those stories. That's why you're here.
Like, okay, so it's 2019. So it's 2019. That school year, we had gotten a new principal. And when that principal came in, I think she came in as like, she didn't try to like build relationships with people. She just kind of came in and started trying to change things. And I think she came in with like her own preconceived notions about everybody. I think she probably had been briefed by the previous principal. And so she brought in some probably biases before she could even like get to know us. And so she didn't come across very well. And towards the end of that school year, she ended up being under investigation by human resources because people had complained about her. And so I did make a mistake, and I'm allowed to, but I made a mistake by giving the wrong test to a group of students. And it wasn't like the state test or anything, but it was a benchmark assessment that everybody was supposed to take at the same time, same test. They're supposed to have the data. But of course, the data is going to be messed up because I gave these probably 10 kids the wrong test. Okay, I owned up to it. I even went to her and told her as soon as I realized that same day, I went and told her that I had here, let's fix it. This is what I'm going to do to fix it. She just ran with that mistake as a way to point out why I wasn't a fit for the role. And so later on, probably a couple months after that, it was time to get our contracts. And in Texas, you'll get handed a teaching contract or your instructional coaching contract for the next school year. And you sign it and you hand it back to the principal. Well, she handed everybody a contract except me. And so I went to her and I was like, hey, I didn't get a contract. She was like, oh, yours is still coming over from HR. I should have it. I'll give it to you. I guess the next day she put it on my desk or she put it in my mailbox. And the contract was a teacher contract, but I was an instructional. So I went and talked to her about it and it did not go well. She basically told me that I'm going to be a teacher the next year. No conversation, no.
So, you know what's interesting? Of course, the audience, they need to hear us that story, but I just want to stop for a second. And the amount of poor communication on the side of administration in your story is really interesting. It feels like I don't want to deal with conflict. Didn't tell you the people that you were going to be the team lead. I don't want to deal with conflict. Put it on someone else. I don't want to talk to you about you being a teacher. Don't want to deal with conflict. Put it in your mailbox. It's not nice to have conflict. I want to avoid conflict, and putting the responsibility of the conversation on you, so much so that, going back a little bit, you weren't invited to a funeral off of lack of communication, which I'm sure the principal went to that funeral, right? And so, yeah. And so this is something that's reoccurring, not just for you, but I hear this so much about administrators who are not wanting to have clear communication, or if something's brought to them, they overreact, right? They fly off the handle and they just start accusing because they have had no training on emotional intelligence, conflict, conversation, critical thinking, critical questioning skills, managing stress, so that first person comes to you, they were hoping that you wouldn't say anything, you'd sign it. Of course you were going to say something. They get to do all this hooting and hollering, right? And that's just so unfortunate that this is the first time I've heard this particular story, but it's not the first time I've heard of administrators not being good with communication.
Yeah, it's a shame. I feel like being an administrator is an extremely hard job, almost to the level of being almost impossible. Not impossible, but they're setting you up for failure because that's a lot of stuff for one person to manage, like all the stakeholders and the assessment and this and that. It's just too much. And so they're under a lot of pressure. So I will say that. But yeah, so she tried to give me the teacher contract and I was like, no, ma'am. And I left it on her desk and I never signed it and I left. I ended up at the end of that school year, I wrapped up that school year. And then I started, even before the school year was over, I started looking for another job.
Yeah.
And so I ended up leaving.
Where did you go after that?
And what's really funny, Asia, is I would have stayed longer in teaching or in public school, public education. I would have stayed longer had it not been for that situation.
Sure.
Because I just started applying for jobs anywhere. I was trying to get out of a bad situation with her because even though she was under investigation by HR, I didn't want to chance it that she was going to still come back and be the principal the next school year.
That's right.
And I did go talk to HR about the fact that she gave me the teacher contract and they said that there was nothing they could do. They didn't even have my back to say, you can't do this to her. You don't have any documentation. You don't have, what has she done to, besides giving the wrong test. Literally, that was the one mistake I made all year. And it wasn't even that big of a mistake. But anyway, I ended up getting a job at an education nonprofit.
So you left teaching completely.
Yes.
Yeah. I just want to pause then, since this is kind of, when you were talking just now about leaving education and HR, social media has taught lots of people that HR is not our friend, right? HR of an organization is for the best interest of the organization,
Absolutely.
right? And so, like, I don't want to make any assumptions about the ease of hiring of one position over the other, but they made the choice because they could have chose to have mediation or chosen to anything, but
They could have
they could have. There was lots of things that probably were in their power or giving you some advice or whatever, but they chose what they did. And
moved me to another school and still had me be an instructor. I would have done that.
yeah, but there was just like a, oh, well. And in the same conversations, we'll have districts saying, we don't know why people are leaving teaching. We don't know what happened. How did, and this is why the podcast exists, to tell this exact story that you're telling. Like, don't say that you don't know. Don't say that they didn't reach out, because people are reaching out. Folks are trying to get resources, are trying to ask questions, or do want to transfer. And these type of situations make it very difficult for folks. And perhaps on the back end, 2 years, 3 years, you say, oh, I could have did such and such. I could have whatever, but it wasn't meant for you to remember in the first place or think about in the first place. That's the work of HR. And before that, it was the administrator's job to have a conversation that she didn't want to have. So I hate that that was conversation. And especially in a place of, I'm going to, like you just said, I'm looking for any way to get out of this particular situation. Right. And that's so challenging, because if you weren't necessarily ready to transition and this happened abruptly, then it shifts how we think about what our next move is and the why and what we want to do. For some people, it can really change that plan, or there was no plan because you weren't planning to leave. So I really hate to hear that.
Yeah, I wish it would have ended different. And what's crazy is that principal, she ended up going on FMLA like midway through that next year, and she never came back.
And they offered, at UCI, FMLA was offered to her from HR.
When they could have kept me there, and she was the one under investigation by HR. Like, why should she get to stay? So it was just, you are so right. A lot of unfair situations, not listening to teachers, not coming up with solutions. HR, like you said, could have mediated. They could have transferred me. They could have did a lot of things. But one good thing that happened there at the end of that was that I didn't do an exit interview, but they gave me a chance to write. I remember typing out like it in a letter format. I don't know why I remember that, but they gave me a chance to give feedback. So that was great. I think it was maybe a survey where I could like type some stuff or whatever it was. I was able to give feedback, and I did fill that out. So that was something they did right. Did they do anything with the information? I don't know. But yeah, I ended up leaving and going to working for a nonprofit. But you know what? When bad things happen or unfair things happen, usually something good is going to come out of it. I'm a firm believer in that. There's always a gift and an opportunity in challenges. And so, in that challenge, the gift for me was getting to go into the nonprofit space, because I was like, what? Nonprofit? Like, we can design our own programs. There's no like bureaucracy telling us what we can't do. There's no assessments. We come up with our own, data points and assessments and things like that. And as we could do anything we want, is we just have to get the funding for it.
Yeah, yeah. You were
So
talking
I
about that.
really love that freedom.
Yeah. So yeah, you know what? We have some time. Tell us a little bit about the differences that you experience in the nonprofit sector. You're not in there now. We'll talk about what you're doing now. But tell us some of those like right away differences that you experienced. Because I know I was in nonprofit right after teaching, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so different. And I thought I was going to be there forever, but obviously I am not. But tell us how that was for you. And I think too, and I remember us having this conversation, there are folks who want to transition into nonprofit sector. What things you did to your resume, or how did you make that transition with the experience that you had, with the background that you had? I know that's a lot of questions at once, but feel free to answer whatever you want.
Yeah. And I didn't know you came from nonprofit. We have a lot in common. That was back in 2019. So I don't know if I did anything to my resume or not. Probably not a lot. I feel like back then it was a little bit easier to transition. Anything before the pandemic was easier than it is now. It was easier to transition as a teacher to something else. And so I had actually gotten a call from a recruiter who had found my resume and was recruiting for that particular organization. So that I did the screener interview with her, and then I ended up going and interviewing in person with this organization. So that's kind of how I ended up transitioning. But I don't want to recommend people to leave education. Like we need more Black teachers. We need good teachers to stay put if they can. But I get it when situations and circumstances are out of control and you know that you cannot stay there. Like in my situation, there was no way I was going to stay and work under that lady. You got to do what you got to do. It's hard for me to say, yes, leave education because I wanted to stay. I probably would still be there. I have the degree and I'm still to this day certified as a principal. I could go and apply for a principal job right now. The goal was for me to be a principal, but I ended up leaving and going into nonprofit. So some of the differences or the similarities
Oh, hold on one second.
are.
1 second. I want to add on to what you're saying, and that I 100% agree. I think that all the folks that I've interviewed on podcast, I don't think anybody wanted to leave, right? Which is why it makes it so challenging. It's not this place of like, we want people to leave education. It's since you have already left and this situation was so crappy that happened to you. But yeah, we hope that folks listen to this podcast who are in education, who have positions of power, can hear people's stories and say like, now we know what to do different to retain Black educators, because there is a need for Black educators in teaching, in being paraprofessionals, being administrators, athletic coaches. But you have to, like you just said, you got to treat folks right. And I think that's the part that's become more and more challenging is folks are showing up, they're putting up their A game, they're doing what they need to do, they're owning their mistakes, they're doing everything they can do, but situations are happening over and over again across this country that's making people have to make a decision they didn't want to make. Right. And that's just so unfortunate that it just keeps happening over and over again. I don't think there's a single person. So you'll be my 82nd interview, 81st interview. I don't think that out of 80 some odd interviews, people just was like, I'm just couldn't wait to leave. Everybody thought like I'd be a lifer or at least a few more years. Right. But then they end up, it's just not the case. So, but yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I do, because I don't want folks to think that we know this is like a hope people are leaving, help people go. It's more of a at that crossroad and you don't know what to do next. There's a difference between wanting to be there and being stuck, right? And if you know it's time to go and you want to be in a place where you leave your kids feeling good about the situation the best that you can, like how do I transition to still impact youth maybe, or still be a good citizen without losing my mind, literally, and continue on. So I'm glad that you said that.
Yeah. I was just going to say that if you listeners, if you are leaving education, nonprofit is a good route to go. It's similar, especially if you go into an education nonprofit where you're still like serving students and you have student focused programs. I think it's a kind of a natural it was a really just natural transition for me. And the reason I loved it so much is because of the freedom. I think that's what the big difference is. There's a lot more freedom to do the things that you want to do without, like I said, people telling you the powers that be, the state policies and things telling you what you can't do as a teacher. You can't teach this. You can't use this book. You got to do the nonprofit. There was none of that. So I did like that. Now the hours were longer. Typically, some of the hours are shorter for teachers. So that was a little bit of an adjustment for me having to work until 5 o'clock when I was used to getting off at 3 o'clock. So that was a change there, but the pay was pretty good. It was a little few thousand more than what I was making as a teacher. So I got a little bit of a pay raise. Did not have the summers off. That was an adjustment. So, little stuff like that I had to kind of adjust to like, oh, I'm not going to be home the whole month of June. I'm going to be having to commute to work. And, so just factoring all that in. But I would say for sure it's a good move if you are in a situation where you know you need to leave.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I know that some people even retire from education and choose nonprofit. Like I still want to be active. I still want to do something in community, and they'll choose that. Yeah. So then my next question is, we'll do them a little bit out of order since we're talking about the workplace and talking about nonprofit. And you already said, I'm not doing that. I'm doing something totally different. What are you doing now? Tell our audience what you're up to.
Yeah. So I started Reparations Ed back when I was still working in nonprofit because what I saw a need for was a need for teacher training around equity, educational equity, especially for Black students. I saw a lot of teachers that came in with biases and stereotypes about Black people, even teachers who themselves were Black. We all have biases. We are all socialized. If you grew up here in America, chances are you have some types of stereotypes and biases about Black people. So I started the Reparations Ed in 2020 to train teachers. And I was doing workshops about history. Like I did a couple workshops about the history of Dallas, and how Dallas did not officially desegregate schools until 2003. I talked about that and just talked about bias. And so from there, the tides have turned and like talking about race, anti racism and educational equity is not in style anymore. And I still talk about it, but it's like I still need to eat. So I made a little bit of a pivot because I've always been interested in wellness, especially for educators, because, like you well know, and like I know from listening to your podcast, educators burn themselves out. And yeah, part of it is the system. The system will eat you alive if you let it. A lot of times it's us going overboard and stressing out and attaching a sense of urgency to every single thing. And we wonder why we're so burnt out. And we go above and beyond without even getting paid for going above and beyond. So I was like, you know what? Let me start talking about wellness. Let me pivot over here. I still care about educational equity for Black students and anti racism, but let me talk about wellness. And so I learned about something called positive intelligence. And I was at a networking event one day and a woman told me about it. And I had been struggling a little bit in leadership, working in nonprofit. I was managing a big team. Well, big for me, it was 12 people. And so I was struggling a little bit. And I was like, man, I need some help. And I'm happened to run into that lady and she told me about positive intelligence. And she sent me an assessment. And it was an assessment that it's called a saboteur assessment. And it helps you understand your automatic habitual thought patterns and how patterns are causing you stress. Like we like to think the outside world is causing all the stress. Like our husband or spouse, the kids at school, they won't, our students, they're not listening. Our kids, they're not listening, whatever it is. But really, the stress starts up here. So that's what I learned about. And I learned that, I have a saboteur that's called a controller. And it's like this anxiety based need to control situations and people. And that saboteur was sabotaging me.
So this kind
And
of
it was
goes back to you, this question about the older sister and teaching in the class, all the way back to our first introduction to you. That's interesting. So even as a child,
saboteurs start in childhood. So you notice that they start in childhood. I always had that. But it was getting out of control. And so that learning about positive intelligence and having some of the leadership issues that I had, I was like, you know what? I could teach this to educators. Like even you earlier mentioned, Asia, about how much responsibility is on educators, especially administrators, and how hard that job is and the lack of emotional intelligence that a lot of people bring to the job and the stress and, their overreactions. I want to help leaders with that so that they don't make the same mistakes that I make. So I do workshops and coaching around positive intelligence. So that is a long-winded way of saying, what I do now.
oh, I love that. When you talked to me about that in like the pre-show meeting, I thought that was just so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that because I know there's probably people in the audience like, oh, that's me. That's me. I need to figure that out. So thank you for sharing that with folks. Same field, different question. I know that you said that you didn't have necessarily a mentor, and that there was like few and far between Black educators in your space. But thinking about your time in education as a student or as an educator, are there Black educators that you would like to shout out?
I thought about this question when you sent me the the questions via email. And, I was like, a lot of folks that I kept in contact with, they're not in education anymore, or a lot of the people I worked with, the Black educators that I knew, not even that I worked with, because it wasn't a lot that I worked with, right? Because there weren't a lot in my space, but the ones that I know, they're, like, not even in education anymore, so it was just hard for me to answer this question, but what I did come up with was I am an avid reader. So, like, in 2025, I read, like, 20 something books, and some people think that's a lot, some people don't even blink an eye because they read a lot too, but one of the books that is really impactful for me from a Black woman who's an educator is this book. Look how it's all bookmarked and stuff. So it's culturally responsive teaching of the brain by Zaretta Hammond. I recommend that book to everybody. I didn't discover that book until I was out of the classroom. I am a huge Zaretta Hammond fan. Zaretta Hammond is the first person I've ever heard talk about teaching being a partnership and partnering with students rather than like a top down expert approach. Like, I'm the teacher and I'm pouring all my knowledge down into you kids. No, she talks about partnering with kids. And that was like, that blew my mind. I was like, oh, this is how. And she talked about how to build relationships with students because schools are very much institutions. And in institutions, there's like a level of control. And she helped you think about how to relinquish that control and instead build a relationship and partner with the students and help them be in charge of their own learning. It's mind blowing. I think every educator should read it. When I was working in nonprofit, another good thing about working in nonprofit is you can do a good book study whenever you want. So the people that worked under me, we did a book study over culturally responsive teaching in the brain for 2 school years. So that's why that book, it's so marked up and it's so bookmarked and everything because we did book studies under it. But we just don't teach stuff like that before people go into classrooms.
I remember I must have still been teaching when that book came out because that district gave it to everyone. And I thought it was an amazing book. Yeah. And actually, Zaretta Hammond just put another book out at the end of last year. And I know she's been talking about that a ton. I don't remember the name, but I will definitely shout her out when I put this out on the internet.
You need to get her on this podcast. I am manifesting that for you, Asia.
I will
She's
try.
so brilliant. Try. She's on LinkedIn.
I know she and I are connected on LinkedIn. She's like some of my content. So
Good.
we're getting closer.
Yes, yes. I think she would come on here. She's so dope. She has changed the way I think about teaching, but unfortunately, I was no longer, in the classroom to implement it, but I was able to teach others with it. So that to me, to answer your question, that's a Black educator that I want to shout out, Zaretta Hammond.
Thank you. Last question. So you talked about wellness and the importance of wellness and being a saboteur and working through that and the oldest sister, sibling, or oldest daughter, things like that. For you, all this training, all this life, later, what does it mean for you to be well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing is self awareness. I have gained so much self awareness since discovering positive intelligence and doing the work on myself. I thought I was self aware before, but man, we all have blind spots. Sometimes we just don't know how we're being perceived by others and how, some of the negative thinking can spiral and show up in our energy. Even though you think you're showing up a certain way, all that negative thinking, all that, you were doing before you got to the place, it still shows up in your energy. So just working on my energy, my thoughts create reality, man. You cannot function with just negative thinking constantly. I didn't realize how negative my thoughts were and how I was not giving myself grace. I was so hard on myself. I had such a harsh judge that would just judge everything so harshly. And I realized I was doing it to myself and to other people. So being able to quiet that and catch that through self-awareness, through a lot of other techniques with positive intelligence has been a game changer for me. I'm more present. I give myself and others grace. I think too, being well is about physical exercise because I feel like as Black women, we need to do better collectively because the Black women that I know and that I've seen, they have excuses for why they can't work out. And I used to be that person too. So I'm not like judging anybody. I care very deeply for Black women. And so that just a lot of times they'll say, I don't have time or I don't this or that. There's so many excuses for not just getting out to take a walk or doing some yoga. So I just really try to always keep that top of mind when I start feeling negative, when I get, feel depressed or sad or any of those negative emotions, I know it's time to move my body. I've been sitting at the computer for too long. So I just want us to do that together. Like I love those Black women like clubs where they're like the run clubs or the yoga. I just love that for us. So being physically fit, that is a huge, not even just physically fit, but just being able to move my body is so important. And that is one huge way that I keep myself well. It's a form of mental, it helps you have mental clarity when you get up and move. Yeah. So I would say those are two of the biggest ways that I focus on wellness.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And everything you said is so true. I was thinking about as you were talking about positive intelligence and curious as to if you had learned about positive intelligence in 2015 or 14, right? How different your education journey would have been. And, not to say that, you have to answer that question right now, but I just wonder about that because I know that there'll be folks who listen to this episode and look it up and then it changes the trajectory of their life or their career in education or out of education, whatever. But I'm just so curious about that. And, if we have time, actually, can you answer that question? Just thinking about that, how do you think it would have been different?
I think, I would have been nicer to myself and to others. I think it wasn't that I was mean, but I didn't have enough patience. I think I didn't have enough patience as a leader. In some ways I was really strong as a leader, but then in other ways I was like, oh, I could have done that different. And I tend to be a very direct person. And so I feel like sometimes I was too direct and that I needed to soften my approach. So I think I would have built better, stronger relationships with people. I would have not let the stress of it all get to me and probably made some better decisions because stress affects our decision making. It affects our creativity, keeps us in tunnel vision. So if you're a person who's constantly stressed, you're at a computer, you're making decisions, you're just like in this cycle of stress, best believe you are not showing up as your best self and you're not making the best, most creative decisions. I've learned to be more creative, more curious, more joyful in my approach to work than I ever was before. So I think discovering that earlier would have been a game changer for sure. But it's God's timing. It happened when it happened. I'm grateful for the discovery and I'm happy to share it with others.
Yeah, I love that. So, speaking of sharing, tell folks how they can find your information, how they can learn more about working with you. Give us your social, all the information that they would need so that if they want to reach out, they can.
Yeah. So right now, my only social is LinkedIn. So hopefully, you are a LinkedIn queen like Asia and I. So even if you're not, we invite you to LinkedIn. Come over to the positive social media experience. Right? Because, LinkedIn is about being professional and positive and, all of that. So find me on LinkedIn. It's Monica with the K, Monika Robinson. And yeah, let's connect over there. I'm always pushing out content, talking about upcoming events. I do webinars. I'm going to be doing some in-person events. So yeah, connect with me over there. And then, and my website is reparationsed.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Monika, for coming on the show. Folks, you already know what to do. Reach out, find her on LinkedIn, go to her website, get this information so that you can, again, blossom, learn something new, show up in a different way, support others. Until next time, we'll see you later. Peace. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. Every story shared here is a reminder that our wellness matters and that thriving in education is possible when we create spaces of care and belonging. If today's conversation spoke to you, we'd love to keep in touch. You can sign up for our newsletter at exitinterviewpodcast.com or connect with me on LinkedIn to stay up to date on upcoming workshops, consulting opportunities, and ways we're transforming stories into solutions through Lyons Educational Consulting. And before you close out, take a deep breath. Remember that caring for yourself isn't extra, it's essential. Whether you're an educator seeking rest or a school leader reimagining support, you're part of this growing community of care.